News event held by Sweeney Merrigan Law. You'll be hearing from three speakers today, and then we'll open the floor for questions during the Q&A period. The Q&A period will be reserved for members of the news media. If you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. For more info, you can go to sweeneymerrigan.com, where you can find the complaint and the related news release. And in a moment, we'll drop a direct link to the release in the chat window, so look out for that shortly. All right, as I mentioned, you'll be hearing from three speakers today. First, Tucker Merrigan, managing partner at Sweeney Merrigan. Second, Jenna Hubbard, mother of Keone Hubbard. And third, John Hubbard, father of Keone Hubbard. So let's begin with our first speaker, Tucker Merrigan, managing partner at Sweeney Merrigan.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tucker Merrigan, a managing partner at Sweeney Merrigan. We are here to honor the memory of Keone Hubbard and to expose the systemic failures that allowed this preventable tragedy to occur. In a moment, you'll hear from Keone's parents. But first, I would like to provide some information about the lawsuit. This morning, on behalf of the Hubbard family, we filed a lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America and Daniel Webster Council for the fatal loss of Keone Hubbard, an 11-year-old Boy Scout whose life was tragically cut short on July 7, 2023, on Manning Lake in New Hampshire. Out of respect for Keone's family and friends, we are not going to go over all the terrible details of the cause of his death. It was horrific, and it never should have happened. Keone's tragic death occurred during a troop boating activity on New Hampshire's Manning Lake, a day that turned into a stark reminder of what happens when the basics of water safety and that of caring for young children are completely ignored. Shockingly, 8 scouts, including Keone, ages 11 to 14, were placed on a small sport boat by an organization that irresponsibly entrusted the care and safety of those children to an utterly unqualified young boat operator. This operator was the 9th passenger on that boat. He was 18 years old, and he was put in an impossible situation. With a job he was destined to fail. He had been issued his boating license a mere 10 days prior, a license granted solely on the basis of a written exam. He had no safety training. He had less than an hour of experience learning how the boat controls function. He was woefully unprepared to operate a motorboat carrying children, 8 of them no less. To ensure the safety of each child, he was not prepared to do so. He never should have been put in the position of driving that boat. On July 7, 2023, it was 91 degrees out. The driver and his 8 passengers had been on the water for over 5 hours. He allowed the opportunity for the children to swim from the boat. The boat was not anchored, and it was not tethered. Several of the children boarded the boat. He was unable to account for which children were on the boat and who was not. And that is what resulted in Keone's death. This incident violated several of Boy Scouts' very own safety rules. The requirement that a boat operator be a qualified supervisor 21 years or older. The requirement that the operator be experienced and trained. The requirement of a second person to serve as a lookout for children in the water. The requirement of a head count before engaging a motorboat. The requirement of a buddy system. The requirement of the operator being a trained lifeguard. Never mind the requirement of lifeguards on duty. The requirement of planning for an emergency response. These are the basics of safety. The basics of water safety, the basics of camp safety, and the basics of safety of children. Following this incident, multiple scouts told investigators that prior to this horrific event, the driver had demonstrated a disturbing pattern of dangerous behavior while operating the motorboat, conduct that should have immediately raised concerns. The New Hampshire State Police Marine Division investigated this case and issued a final report months after. It concluded that this tragedy was not a freak accident, but the inevitable result of a systemic failure. The Boy Scouts of America, along with the Griswold Scout Reservation, the Daniel Webster Council, and Camp Bell, all failed in their fundamental duty to ensure the safety of children in their care. Keone's death is a damning example of what occurs when an organization places critical responsibilities in the hands of the unqualified. This driver, the campers, and especially Keone, were set up to fail by leaders who ignored established safety protocols and basic common sense. The failure begins at the top, most notably with the Boy Scouts of America, whose actions have repeatedly put our children at risk. Year over year, for decades, this organization has captured headlines throughout our entire country for repeatedly betraying the trust placed in them by children and their parents. It is not lost on us that the Boy Scouts of America is currently fighting its way out of a bankruptcy after abusing tens of thousands of children who have been harmed while scouting. In the wake of this tragedy, friends, schoolmates, and fellow scouts have reached out to the Hubbard family, sharing how deeply Keone touched their lives. He was the most perfect, sweet, innocent young boy. He loved his sister dearly. He loved his parents. He had a special relationship with each of them. He was one of those kids that just made everyone happy. He brought joy to his peers, his teachers, and most especially his parents. His troop even created a special scout patch in his honor, a bittersweet tribute that underscores the urgent need for accountability and meaningful change, which we fully expect this lawsuit to achieve. Thank you for your attention, and I will now turn it over to Mrs. Jenna Hubbard.
Thank you again. That was Tucker Merrigan, managing partner at Sweeney Merrigan. Let's go to our second speaker, Jenna Hubbard.
Thank you for listening to our story. My name is Jenna Hubbard, and I am Keone's mom. I remember the last thing I said to Keone before he left for camp. I gave him a hug. I told him I loved him, and I said, have fun and be safe. And that haunts me because he was not safe. There is no healing from this. I am a completely different person after losing my sweet boy. Keone was a gift. He was an amazing son, brother, grandson, and friend. He wouldn't want me to be so sad. In fact, he was the first person to give me a hug or run to get me a tissue if something was upsetting me, or we were watching a sad movie. Keone's greatest joy was to take care of others. I did not know that this level of sadness existed. Even the word sad seems insufficient. And it is overwhelming to think that I will feel this way every day for the rest of my life. I'm devastated. My son won't be able to grow up, figure out what he wants to do with his life, find someone to love and grow old with. I don't get to see him do all those things and more. Shortly after Keone died, I had to quit my job, because my grief consumes me out of nowhere like a panic attack. There is nothing I can do except stop, breathe, and feel my feelings. I never know what will trigger my grief. Sometimes it's triggered by hearing my son's school bus in the morning, or by seeing another boy wearing glasses. I want people to know that the Scouts are not living up to their own laws, especially their first law that says a Scout is trustworthy. Tell the truth and keep promises. People can depend on you. Keone took the Scout oath and the Scout laws very seriously, and the organization utterly failed him, especially on this. We taught Keone that people show you who they are through their words and actions. We also taught him that when people show you who they are, to believe them. Keone died about 1.5 years ago. What have the Scouts shown us? They have shown us that they did not care about Keone. I have a message for the Scouts. Keone mattered. And so does the safety of the millions of other kids headed to Scout camps this year. Parents, please do not trust the Scouts to take care of your kids. In Keone's memory, we want to honor who he was: an amazing son, a loyal friend, and a truly kind human being. He was the best a mom could ever hope for. But also in his memory, we want to make sure that this never happens again. Keone hated people getting hurt. In his honor, we are fighting so that no family goes through the pain and suffering that we are trying to survive every day. We love you, Keone. Thank you.
Again, that was Jenna Hubbard. And let's go to our third speaker, John Hubbard. Go ahead, John.
Hello, my name is John Hubbard. I'm Keone's dad. As much as the typical person thinks they can imagine the pain of losing a child, it is worse than that. The pain starts the moment 2 police officers knock on your door, holding a piece of scrap paper with your son's name on it. Your entire existence shatters. The person you were and the family you had ceases to exist. You now live in a different world than other people. It is the world of lost children. It is one where everything is tainted with the crushing reality that something important is missing and will never be found. A world where you now have to do something in the memory of your child instead of making memories with them. Everything is darker. Beauty is dulled. Every joyful event is quickly tainted with the fact that your son is not there to see it and never will be. I am trapped in my own version of hell on earth, a hell where the best part of my day is when I wake up and for half a moment, I forget my son is dead. But then I remember and somehow have to get up anyway. And this doesn't end. This is my life. I've talked to people whose children have died 30, 40 years ago, and they're still living in this horrible world of lost children. Still struggling to make sense of something that, by its very nature, cannot be made sense of. Simply put, a parent should not outlive their child. Some people say time heals, but that's not true. Time does not heal this. There is no coming back from the death of a child. That world does not exist for us anymore. The best thing I can do is hold the Boy Scouts accountable, share our story, and most importantly, help others the way Keone did, by being a kind and good person. I am doing this for Keone because I can't do it with him. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Again, that was John Hubbard. And that takes us to the Q&A portion of the call. If you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. As a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you're having any issues with your own audio or the raise your hand function, you can use the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to all the questions there too. Before we take any questions, I also want to mention that we will have a video recording of this news event available later today. It'll be on the Sweeney Merrigan website. Let's see. Sorry. And if you do need to connect with any of the speakers that you're hearing from today after the call, you can contact Max Carlin at 703-276-3255. Let's go ahead and take our first question. It's coming from Stephen Porter at the Boston Globe. Stephen, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This question is for Tucker. I noticed that you did not mention the name of one of the defendants in this case. And I'm wondering if you could explain the extent to which you believe he bears culpability for the events that transpired.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I can speak on behalf of us as the lawyers for the Hubbard family, but most importantly on behalf of John and Jenna. We didn't want to sue the operator of this boat, but that's what the law dictates. And he was put in an impossible situation due to the complete disregard for any common sense by the leaders of the organizations that are also defendants. And so for that reason, I've not shared his name and do not intend to do so during today's presentation.
Okay, thank you for your question, Stephen. Feel free to queue up if you have a follow-up. I've got a question in the Q&A box. It's from Anne-Marie Timmons at New Hampshire Public Radio. Anne-Marie asked if you could talk a little bit more about what you're seeking in terms of specific changes by the Boy Scouts. Any other, policy changes, financial compensation, that sort of thing.
Yes, thank you. The changes are broad. We have discussed them extensively. We've sought input from experts in the field. There are a variety of changes that can be made, many of which I listed in my statement previously about the various requirements that were not adopted. But there needs to be mechanisms in place to ensure that any rules or systems aren't just stated, but enforced. Because if we don't enforce them, they're meaningless. And so it is our hope that a comprehensive water safety program will be implemented for all Boy Scouts in America, as well as hopefully adoption from other camps and other institutions that take care of children involving water safety.
All right, thank you. As a reminder, the Q&A is for reporters only. If you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function and we'll take your question that way. Or if you prefer, you can use the text-based Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom console and we can get your question that way. And I'm checking to see.
And Anne-Marie, I can follow up to say financial compensation. In the jurisdiction we filed, we do not lead financial compensation. But change only comes, unfortunately, when people are forced to change. And I fully expect that the process which we have sought and will continue to seek will be acknowledgement for the loss of Keone, taking responsibility for that and making it right. And we expect a jury to deliver on all three of those, and we anticipate a jury to deliver a verdict well in excess of $100 million.
Thank you. We're getting our next question from Maggie Scales at the Lexington Observer. Go ahead, Maggie.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm curious how you all learned about the details of the incident and whether or not you heard anything from the scouts about what happened.
The details of the incident are thoroughly documented in the various regulatory investigative reports that were produced, specifically the New Hampshire State Police Marine Division.
Okay. Thanks for your question, Maggie. We've got an email question here asking if you could talk more about the unofficial Boy Scout patch that was created by Keone's troop, but they're not allowed to wear it during meetings.
Sure. After Keone's death, there was a patch created, and let me speak to it, if you bear with me for one moment.
It's on the event thumbnail.
It's important that I get this right, so just bear with me. The patch was created by Keone's troop, and it was created to honor him. The kids wanted Keone to have a way to become an Eagle Scout. So in the patch, which we can share, the eagle is center stage. There's an orange tulip that is held by the eagle in celebration of Keone's time where he lived with his family in the Netherlands. The eagle is holding a golden spatula, an award that Keone received for cooking a delicious meal at Camp Bell. And if you look closely, you can see the handle of the spatula is a lightsaber, which was a lovely touch. The mountains on the patch reference Keone's birth and first 5 years growing up in Seattle, where he lived with his family, surrounded by the Cascade Mountains. But interestingly enough, Keone's troop and fellow Scout peers are forbidden from wearing this patch in Boy Scout activities. So somebody at one point asked what we understand may be the communication from the Boy Scouts. And while not to me directly, the communication is these young boys who were friends of Keone's and who were there when he died are not permitted to wear this patch while at a Boy Scout activity.
Thanks, Tucker. We've got a follow-up in the Q&A box. It says, could the Hubbards speak to the response in terms of statements and actions that they've had from the Boy Scouts since Keone's death?
I appreciate your question, Anne Marie, but that's something that I can speak to, but I'm going to limit Mr. and Mrs. Hubbard from answering that question. The statements and actions, there's a reason we filed the lawsuit today. There's a reason why we filed the lawsuit after 1.5 years since this incident occurred. And like I previously communicated, there are 3 requirements that we have, which is acknowledgement, take responsibility, and make it right. And until those are met, this lawsuit will proceed and we will pursue a verdict by a jury. And I say that to say the only other statement that we know about is the one I referenced with regards to Keone's patch.
Thanks, Tucker. All right, as a final reminder, we know we've had some folks come in kind of late in the event. We want everybody to have an opportunity to ask a question when we've got all of our speakers together. The Q&A period is for reporters only. If you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function in Zoom, and we'll take your question by audio. You can also type a question in the Q&A box, and we can take your question that way. And I'll give that a moment while I remind everybody where you can find more information following today's news conference. If you need to connect with Tucker or the Hubbards or get any materials, you can contact Max Carlin at 703-276-3255, and we can take your questions offline that way. I'm going to try to drop a link here. Let's see if this is ready. Okay. If the link to the release is not populated yet, but if you still need a copy to the news release, again, you can contact Max Carlin, and we will make sure you're taken care of. So I don't see any additional questions in the question queue. So we do thank you all for joining this news event held by Sweeney Merrigan Law. And that concludes today's news event. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.